Swanston Street, I'm advised, has engineering issues, tunnel depth of just 8 metres underneath the busiest tram route in Australia, and of course having no rail connection at South Yarra, it would be problematic. We can afford these projects now, as I said, because the budget is in a good position. We can afford to employ more nurses in our hospitals than ever before, more teachers in our public schools than ever before, almost 1,000 protective security officers on our railway stations, the first time ever, because good governance is about jobs and the way we live. And in planning, in the planning space, if you do nothing, you'll never make a mistake. Tony Di Domenico said that to me very early on, how right he was. And not everything I've done has been right, not everything has been perfect, but indeed we have certainly had a go. When I got this job in government, I said that as a minister we would reform the fundamentals of state policy and state planning structures, and we have. When I got the job, I said we would change the way people viewed the planning system in this state, and I believe we have. And when I got the job, I actually said very clearly that I would be an interventionist minister. And like it or not, I think I have been. Back in 2010, can I be political and say my opponents didn't even have a planning policy? I think I launched the guts of mine at the UDIA in the River Room next door. I say again, I don't believe my opponents in the 2014 election will have one either. So over 4 years, let me just look back and then talk about some of the points for the future. We have taken on land supply shortages in this state, setting clear targets on land release and in Melbourne and right across regional Victoria. Until today, we'd approved 83,000 lots in Melbourne's growth areas. It's now nearly 150 developments active in growth areas to around 80 when there was just 4 or so years ago. This strong effort to increase land supply and competition in growth areas has allowed us to grow house construction levels to levels not seen since 2011, and indeed without, though, the massive subsidies. Affordability has improved. The median lot price and lot per square metre price are both well below the peak they were a few years ago. It may reduce profit margins, as we know, from what they might have been, but it is good for builders, it's good for home buyers, and of course it keeps competition and activity in this marketplace. I have also committed to releasing 50,000 lots this year in calendar year 2014. This is vital for continuing our competitive advantage in affordability over other Australian cities. Today I can announce I've also approved another 12,000 lots in 2 precinct structure plans for Land Road and Westbrook, both in the growing area of Wyndham. This now brings the total to date of 95,000 lots in our growth areas released since 2011. No other capital city, no other state government has able or is able to match this deliberate attempt to combat affordability issues in our growth area market. It's not just Melbourne. We've brought forward land in Warragul, Traralgon, Ballarat, Morwell, Moe, Newborough, Churchill, a range of cities right around the state, and of course particularly in Geelong. I see a need to bring in further land into the Geelong market so that that city has clearly a number of growth corridors for the future. Places like Lovely Banks and others to the north of the city must be brought into a framework where the Metropolitan Planning Authority can work with the Council to ensure there is competition in a market that is only going to grow into the future. Our land supply objectives are being matched by a robust development contribution system. It is undergoing reform and it will ensure that long-term certainty exists from the outset. DCP reform, as anyone in this room would know, benefits not just industry. It benefits councils, ratepayers and indeed future residents of the suburbs in which they are put in place. I've also recently approved the Wyndham West DCP, which will cover 7 precinct structure plans in the Wyndham Growth Corridor. That is 77,000 residents, 27,500 homes, 91 hectares of employment land. We'll have a new funding method for road funding upgrades so that infrastructure can be brought forward, and it will be a total contribution of around $400 million from the industry back into those services that are so vital for Australia's fastest growing growth area. Victoria's housing approvals are consistently strong, and that is primarily because of not just growth area land supply, but also central city investment in supply and confidence. People in this room would know that I've been unashamedly pro-growth when it comes to our central city area. I see central Melbourne being a city, a place for people who want to go out to the theatre, to dinner, to the sport, to shopping, to work or to live. It's the first true 24-hour capital city centre anywhere in Australia. It's not just a place for hipsters to sit at the back of a bar drinking a glass of red wine reading a history book. Our city centre is an exciting place. It is a place that can cater for many different interests, not just that of a few. And to make our city a place for all, it needs to be one that has opportunity and people. That's what the government's agenda has been about. That's what Plan Melbourne is about. Opportunity and people. In the urban renewal space, we've been the most active government in Victoria's history. Fisherman's Bend, East Werribee, newly identified sites in Plan Melbourne. These are places for high density growth, and they are spread right across the city. Across existing urban areas, we have reformed our zone structure, particularly residential and commercial zones. And for those keen on facts, Glen Ira reported last year the highest permit activity over the financial year than any of the other 15 years preceding it. The dwelling approval levels are now at record highs in a council where the neighbourhood residential zone was widely used. It's the government's firm belief that this new zone structure will start to define those areas of change more definitively and deliberately than ever before. The general residential areas will be places of far greater change than the residential 1 zone that they replaced. Commercial zone 1s have become mini capital city zones right across the metropolitan area. There's over 1,000 hectares to date of residential growth zone land across the metropolitan area, not including Plan Melbourne identified urban renewal sites or national employment clusters. This represents, at a first instance, around 4 Fisherman's Bend across the city. As I've said, it doesn't include a range of metropolitan councils that are still going to submit their plans or have those approved, or those that are transferred only to the general residential. And we finally introduced code assessment to our planning system through VicSmart, which will finally come into being in September. Talked about for years, it will cut at minimum around 8,500 permits out of the existing merit assessed system, easing time delays and giving certainty for permits in those classes of its use. In the next term of government, I see VicSmart's eventual expansion. I see it becoming a default permit application system, particularly in industrial and commercial zones right across Victoria. Plan Melbourne's replaced Melbourne 2030, changing the focus of planning from an academic to an economic portfolio. Regional growth plans have been delivered, ensuring the state's planning jigsaw fits together and that planning is finally conducted on a regional basis rather than an isolated municipality basis.